Artificial intelligence is impacting our everyday life, whether it's autonomous vehicles or personal assistants like Siri. AI is becoming more ingrained in our daily life. Should it be ingrained in our politics? Hello and welcome to the Unpublished TV. I'm Ed Hand. We're coming to you from a remote location and practicing physical distancing to enhance safety. Artificial intelligence is evolving as our society does, and is in some cases making our lives easier by doing those menial tasks. AI has advanced, though, to the point of actually seeming to learn its way out of a problem. It's done through the use of algorithms to predict what might come next. Now imagine putting that technology and ability into our political discussion. What could go wrong? While 2020 will go down in history for the pandemic, it also saw the introduction of the world's first virtual politician, Sam. He ran in the 2020 New Zealand general election. Now, for some, the introduction of AI to politics will bring us back to more evidence-based decisions opposed to those at the whim of others. Our Unpublished.vote question asks, how do you feel about artificial intelligence being used in Canadian politics? 7.1% were okay with it, 87.5% not okay, and just 5.4% unsure. However you're watching or listening to our show, whether through our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, or our podcast channels, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more, I'd like to remind you can still cast your vote on this topic at Unpublished.vote and email your MP to tell them why. Joining us to discuss artificial intelligence in politics, Jesse Hirsch is a researcher and public speaker. His research interests focus largely on the intersection of technology and politics, in particular, artificial intelligence and democracy. And Dr. Emma Bryant is a visiting research associate in human rights at Bard College in New York City. And I thank you both for joining us. And first off, we'll talk with you first, Jesse. Are you surprised by the results? Now, it's not scientific, but it's a reflection of our viewers and listeners. And 87.5% say they're not okay with AI in politics. Does that surprise you or no?
Not at all. I think there is a general anxiety, apprehension about the role that AI is playing in our lives. In particular, the notion of automated decision-making, which as a subset of AI, I think is something that also freaks people out. But I would, unfortunately, terrify those people even more by saying AI has been used in politics now for a couple of decades. AI is being integrated into government at a very rapid pace. And where citizens may feel that they are entitled to having a say as to whether this happens, unfortunately, it's happening so fast that citizens are not being consulted and they're not being asked. So to your point, I think those numbers they resonate, not just in Canada, but around the world, in part because people do feel as if this technology is advancing and they're not being consulted.
What do you think, Emma? Are you surprised by the overwhelming support for it not to be involved in politics, or
not at all? I think with the scandal that I helped to reveal in 2018 over Cambridge Analytica, people have obviously, been very, very wary since that of what these technologies can do. Now, I think that, technologies like artificial intelligence have a hell of a lot of scope for being very beneficial in our societies. We can use, data is not bad. Data can be used for the public good. And, there are, substantial public health, for instance, purposes for which we can apply data. And it might not be, best to necessarily involve the public in every single decision, because actually sometimes these technologies are very difficult to understand and to be able to communicate and to make decisions very, very rapidly. When you're in the middle of a public health crisis, sometimes you need to act. However, sometimes the uses that AI have been put to have been, without proper consultation with experts who are independent, who are, critical of this. And governments need to be engaging with the criticisms that have been made when they have been applied. In various different contexts. So, artificial intelligence has been abused and misused and has been just actually wrong sometimes. so often we see algorithms that, do not reflect what they're claiming, do not predict the things they are claiming that they do. And also, they can be applied to purposes that, infringe on our rights. So there needs to be a broad public debate around these things, but I wouldn't say rolling out any advancement is necessarily wrong, in this kind of way.
Right. Okay. Now, Jesse, you had mentioned that AI has been in elections for decades. Now, we can go back to 2012. I guess the Obama election campaign had used a bit of AI in terms of targeting. But can you go back further than that?
Absolutely. And what I'm talking about is public opinion research and public opinion polling.
Right.
I mean, statistics and data science is not new. Algorithms and AI are decades old, right? It goes back into the 70s. What's new is data, the volume of data we have and the computational power that allows for these types of models to be increasingly accurate. But the influence of public opinion polling on elections and politics has been toxic for quite some time, right? It makes it difficult to have diverse debates. It makes it difficult to have politics that's based on policy rather than politics based on personality. So, while the impact of AI is accelerating, is becoming even more powerful, I think it is important we recognize that it's already been playing a role, certainly in campaigns and the way in which political parties choose which issues to promote, and that they don't promote issues based on conviction. They promote issues based on polling data, on polling response, on the likelihood of winning. And that has had an incredibly destructive impact on the health of our democracy and the viability of our policies. But, the Cambridge Analytica incident just illustrated that even more, because it suggested that public opinion polling no longer depends upon opinion surveys. It now incorporates social media data. It now incorporates data that people did not consent to having, used as part of these processes. And I think that's alarming and part of why we're having today's conversation. But I would argue it's the tip of the iceberg, that, we're in a situation in which, because governments have neglected the kind of oversight of technology companies and the public interest research that looks at the social harms of algorithms and the impacts of algorithms, we're kind of in a black box society in which we're trying to reverse engineer these algorithms. We're trying to reverse engineer the influence of these digital platforms and understand their impact on politics, when, nothing stopped, right? Everything's still moving forward. So I think that's why there's a crisis of trust, a crisis of confidence when it comes to the way in which we use these tools.
Emma, crisis of trust is a great way of putting it. I'd suggested the public has a wary view of artificial intelligence. Why do you think that is?
Well, because I mean, actually, as well, I would say that there's a nuance here that is really important. With the Cambridge Analytica case, the real horror of it is how they were abusing data and the scope of and potential for what could be done beyond that. So, for instance, revelations that came out included the use of mental health categories for potential targeting, targeting of neurotic people, of people with anxiety disorders and things like this. And also, not necessarily having consent, as Jesse's pointed out. Now, I would say that beyond just whether or not you have consent is you have to also be going one step further and looking at how we protect people, because people might well consent to giving information that indicates their mental health without really understanding quite how that could be used against them. And we have to, mental health data is protected in most democracies. I should say that. Yeah. However, there are ways you can infer this kind of thing from data that is out there. And it's very, very difficult to know exactly how data is being processed when, these kinds of tools are so black boxed. There is no real ability to interrogate the algorithms and and provide proper oversight. And when, campaigns are, being run, like, it's a zero-sum game, it's win or lose. And, people who are running campaigns have everything at stake. So, the chances that they will take are huge, whereas governments may be slightly more cautious about how they might use data, in democracies at least, because they then have the, scandal of not getting elected because you abused your powers, for instance. So there's more to lose, I think, for governments than there is for politicians who, have everything to win if everything to gain if they win. Also, in terms of like the types of use of data that we need to be thinking about, we also need to be thinking about into the future, the role of AI in actually, determining the content and writing, so at the moment the creative process is mostly done by humans, and the technology isn't quite so advanced that the algorithms can write the propaganda itself, can't write articles that are really convincing to us yet. But the machine learning is advancing so rapidly, and computer technology is advancing so rapidly, that we can see into the future that it's likely that they will be able to auto-generate content that is really very much honed to you automatically without human involvement. That's something that worries me a lot, even more so than these kinds of deep fakes that people have been talking so much about in the media.
Why does this worry you more?
Because I think I don't know. I think the whole deep fake thing is important, but I think it's much easier to get away with articles and things like this, posts, and making them look genuine. Whereas things that are, a deep fake of a prime minister or something, that is going to be exposed fairly quickly when they say, hey, I didn't do that or didn't say that. Now, that doesn't mean automatic detection is very, very strong. And yes, it probably will have got halfway around the world by then. But, when it comes to texts, you can highly target this in a way that, I think could be very, worrying. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that's going to be spreading on Facebook, but could be in your emails, and it can be delivered through any mechanisms and things like that. I think the immediacy of how it would regenerate and learn according to you is something that I think adds extra concern, because if the propaganda can be basically based around everything that you are and auto-generated and honed around convincing you according to everything that they know about you automatically, then I think this would be very, very disturbing. At the moment, I don't think we're quite at that stage yet. We're getting there, I would say.
Okay. Jesse, ethics in artificial intelligence. Google recently let go 2 people working specifically on AI ethics. Now, can big companies like Google, Facebook, et cetera, be trusted to use this technology ethically?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
why?
That's an easy question. Well, because they're not accountable to society. They're only accountable to their shareholders, right? And their shareholders and their relationship with their shareholders, is different than a government's relationship with its subjects or its citizens. Now, AI and ethics is a bit of a paradox. I often argue that AI ethics is something created by the AI industry so that they can justify what they were going to do anyway, but be able to say that it's ethical and therefore it's okay to do it. I mean, if I am to believe in a democratic society, then I think it's essential for that democratic society to restrain and regulate power. And I think there's tremendous power to be found in these digital companies, tremendous power to be found in these digital platforms. And with great power comes great responsibility. And I think a democratic society has the responsibility to oversee and regulate such power. Part of that was what you guys were talking about in terms of the influence on news and the influence on people's perception of reality and their participation in the democratic polity. But I think it also reflects the privacy concerns, the harm concerns. you know, the ethics stuff of AI, I think should not be the domain of private companies. I think it should be the domain of governments, right? I think Parliament is the appropriate place to debate AI ethics. I think that federal governments are, and the Canadian government, to give credit, right? The Canadian government released something called the Algorithmic Impact Assessment. And this is a tool that allows governments or companies to look at the impact that their AI will have. And it's a very, you know, it's early days, but it's a very powerful tool that the Canadian government has created and made available to the world, because no company was ever going to do it, right? Facebook is never going to say, well, let's create a tool to see how Facebook impacts the world. No. And that's why I think there's a role in governments, there's a role in parliaments debating AI ethics. And that's where, very briefly, you know, in this controversy where Google fired 2 of their ethicists, part of me actually supports Google, because in both cases, these ethicists, you know, violated corporate policy. And if you believe in ethics, you believe that everybody should be fairly treated according to the policy. So if you're an ethicist at Google and you break corporate policy, well, should you be above the rules? Should you be, you know, above the law? Again, I'm digressing, but yeah. I feel that the field of AI ethics is incredibly important, but should not be left to private companies, and instead should be what our elected officials debate in our parliaments. What
do you think, Emma? You want to jump in?
I to some degree, I agree. It certainly should be the domain of Parliament. However, you know, and I mean, I'm a cynic, okay? I don't think any company is ethical. I mean, that ultimately they are going to listen to the bottom line, which is why those 2 people got fired. However, companies do need to understand ethics and what their role should be. And one of the issues, I think, for big companies like that is they, you know, translating policies and laws and, you know, how to develop technology into, you know, anticipating what is going to be an ethical problem needs to be part of their development. You can't like just say, well, the law is such and Parliament decided that ethically, you know, we are allowed to do this much, because you're going to go to the extent of the law. And if you do that, like Facebook did, let's face it, went to the extent of the law, that is probably going to take you into unethical areas. And then you're going to have legislation, which is going to, you know, like be problematic for you, and regulatory responses and so on. So in a way, like companies have to build in the ethics as they're developing to anticipate what is going to follow, because actually, you know, well, if they want to be responsible companies. And I think in order to like please shareholders, that actually they are doing things that are going to keep them within the extent of the law ultimately, and also, you know, not have PR crises. Now, that's not ethics, isn't the same as law and public reaction. However, if you are straying into unethical territory, you are increasing your chances of running foul of both of those. So I think it's helpful for these companies definitely to have ethics teams. I don't think that they necessarily are the answer for us, however. But they definitely need somebody guiding them on these issues.
And all I was suggesting, and agreeing with your general premise, is that should be mandated by law. That there's no reason to not have a law that says when you're designing a powerful product, you must have an inclusive design process that includes ethicists in your design process. Because right now, on a voluntary basis, those scum are not doing that. And that's why you have a democratic government make a law mandating what you just proposed. I'll support that law.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Well, like what we talk about government oversight, and I wonder, because there's a couple of things here. I know Canada is starting to get a lot more investment financially in terms of AI, as we've got hubs in Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, and of course the government loves Edmonton. Of course, governments love jobs and they love that. But the thing is, and I'll be the first to say that AI is an incredibly complex, even just the thought. So trying to break that down, I'm wondering, is the lack of government oversight because the government doesn't really know how it works, where it's going to go, that kind of a thing?
The companies don't know. The companies don't understand their own algorithms. Like, you know, opening this up and articulating it and enabling anything like a meaningful audit of algorithms is incredibly difficult. It's not impossible, I think. I'm in the camp that says it's not impossible. But I'm not a data scientist. But from what I've, you know, read in my research, I would say it's not impossible, and they absolutely need to make it so that these companies perhaps are not quite so powerful that it is impossible. But at the moment, I think we're in a position where, like, not only is it proprietary, and so therefore they black box it because, you know, of reasons of competition and so forth, but also it is just so complex that the companies and the data scientists don't understand their own algorithms because they are going beyond what is understandable for them. And you know,
see, I disagree with that entire premise on multiple levels, and I'll start with the idea being governments, and I'm going to talk about the Canadian government because that's where I live.
Yeah,
the Canadian federal government has tremendous expertise. Right, there are some brilliant people who work for the Federal Civil Service who are more than able to provide the regulatory framework that as a society we require. The politicians, well, that's where you deal with clueless people.
Okay.
Right? That's where you deal with the incompetence. And unfortunately, in a democratic society, the government can't do anything unless the politicians give them authority to do so. And that's the paradox we're currently in. You know, the industry likes to present this myth that AI cannot be explained, that AI cannot be scrutinized. And that is total nonsense. Right? That is a political play done by the industry to avoid government scrutiny. That it is perfectly possible for non-experts to explain what AI does using metaphor and narrative, to the extent that the processes of that AI can be held accountable. So, you know, again, part of my role as a cyberpunk is to disbelieve what the technology industry says. Part of my role as a small d Democrat is to imagine how a democratic government could represent the people and ensure that we all have rights, responsibilities. And that's where I reject entirely the narrative presented by the technology industry that neither technology can be regulated nor AI can be explained. And our friends in Europe are demonstrating that, right? The GDPR was an excellent first step in creating this regulatory framework, and it does include the right to explain, right? Which under current European law, any European citizen who has an algorithm make a judgment about them has as their right the ability to demand that that algorithm explain why it came to that judgment. And if the company cannot comply, they face huge fines. An excellent example of democratic governments saying to industry, we reject your narrative. We're going to protect our citizens, and here's how. So to answer your question, James, I think it's political will, right? It's the political will to do these things. And that's where in North America, we've had a couple of decades of techno-libertarianism in which we assume that the internet cannot be regulated. We assume that technology companies know best, and our democracy is dying as a result of that negligence.
And how do we change that?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Emma.
Go ahead, Emma.
I just wanted to follow up and say, sure. I agree with you. Like, I mean, I think that they can do this. And the one thing that I wanted to follow up on was that I don't think governments are as equipped as you say they are, civil servants, as you specified. From my experiences with defense, I think that they are. Sorry,
your experience with
defense.
Yes. Well, the military is its own bastion of incompetence. I agree. But I was talking about sort of, you know, if we were to take the US government or the Canadian government or even the British government, yes, there's a lot of people deliberately stupid, but there are many really wise people. If we were to empower them and promote them and give them, you know, the tools for their job, they could do it.
But the problem with the military is they get very excited about technologies.
And they got a lot of the money too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They want to spend it. And, you know, you end up in these arms races where, you know, innovation is the exciting thing and so on. Real innovation happens with writing policy, as I always say. But, you know, like it's actually about what you're talking about. It's about, you know, how do we develop limitations? and nobody likes to hear that really when they are, you know, in the military. Department of Defense or whatever. But actually, it's really about, you know, how do we write in restraints for this kind of thing? And it is doable. It is possible. I would point out the GDPR's flaws, though, in that, like, I know so many companies that are working in the influence industry, what I would largely call the influence industry, who are not registered, who, you know, I'm going through like compiling a database. I've got like over 700 companies now in my database, not
just that you know of.
Yeah, and they are not registered under the GDPR with these with the data authorities. So, and how do you require the company to like interrogate its processes if you don't know they have your data in the first place?
Yeah.
And are doing anything.
And that's why I did say GDPR was just a first step, a baby step, but better than we got here in North America, you know.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Let's talk about government oversight. And, you know, obviously in Canada, the US, there's not a ton of it right now. Is there a country in the world right now that's got a handle on the safe use of artificial intelligence for its people? Because, you know, we look at that article in Medium where the Dutch government was actually forced to resign for using improper algorithms, and Lord knows what that, like, where's the confidence in the government there?
I mean, the short answer is it's happening at a municipal level. Right. So we're seeing that there's something called the Coalition for Digital Cities, although they may have since reworked their name, but it's Barcelona, Amsterdam, New York, Berlin. So municipalities, because municipal governments are much closer to their citizens, because they have greater flexibility in their programs, where I think this innovation is happening legitimately is on sort of mega cities, on the type of large municipalities that have the resources that compare to small nation states, but have greater flexibility in terms of their ability to come up with policies. And Barcelona's the leader in this. Like, Barcelona's participatory data initiatives and open source data initiatives really anticipate AI and anticipate sort of the laws and frameworks that need to restrain AI, to use Emma's sort of language. But on a national scale, like on a democratic side, kind of no. Like, France is the one I hold up the most, not because they figured it out, they haven't. But what France is doing that I like is they are recognizing that if this happens only inside of government, they'll fail. That they have to do it in concert with industry, in concert with academia, in concert with civil society, and that whatever government learns, they have to instantly share it with civil society so that civil society learns it at the same time, so that you sort of raise all boats and you get because, you know, the fundamental defense against everything we talked about today is literacy and critical thinking, right? Both inside of the government, but also in the citizenry. And France kind of gets that, right? They're kind of sort of creating a public education platform, a mobilization platform that is imperfect, flawed, has all the trappings of French politics that you could imagine, but I think it's worth supporting, worth recognizing. But outside of that, I personally am not impressed with anything that other democratic governments are doing. But Dr. Brian, I'm curious if there's stuff that has caught your interest.
Emma?
Well, I'm very much a privacy campaigner, and these digital, you know, the smart cities and so on, I find really disturbing, quite honestly. Having lived in New York, really troubles me the amount of surveillance that you are under constantly in that city. Now, I obviously am from the UK. We have a lot of security cameras in the UK too.
Yeah.
But I especially find it troubling in the United States legal context without the GDPR. You know, there are a lot of people who are very concerned about what's going on in New York City. A lot of campaigners trying to resist this. And, you know, I think, you know, they're right. They're, you know, without having a GDPR kind of context, the protecting people, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, surveillance being used against protesters, you know, facial recognition algorithms in the United States being used. I moved into my accommodation and discovered on arrival that you have to use an app to be able to access your mail. And it's, you're supposed to log in with Facebook. And, if you go into the mailroom, there's like I'm not going to say the company name, but a camera on you, and you're using facial recognition databases, and you cannot get your mail without using this. So there's no issue of consent. You're not like realizing this before you move in even. The all-encompassing nature of this is really disturbing. Absolutely no consent. In France, maybe they have this, more dialogue about it, but I don't think these are things that you really can consent to in a meaningful way. They've become so,
pervasive.
Pervasive and necessary to participate in society, that it's very difficult not to, and also to understand what is being done with the, photos that are being taken of you in the film. People don't have the time, let alone knowledge to really understand, how their data is used.
Jesse, can AI enhance democracy, or will it erode it?
It can definitely enhance it, right? And that's where it is, even though Dr. Bryant and I have both been expressing our concerns about the decline of democracy, the very real decline, I am certainly optimistic that as a tool, AI could be used either way, right? That it really depends upon how it's used. It depends upon the context in which it's used. There's all sorts of cyberpunk authors who imagine utopias, who imagine democratic renaissance as a result of data-driven policy, evidence-based policy, and AI. So yes, I very much think it's possible, but I don't think it's where we're currently headed, right? That it would require a complete change in direction in terms of the values of society. And the one I mentioned earlier, which I'll mention again, is participation and inclusivity. Right? If the design of AI was inclusive and participatory, if the use of data was inclusive and participatory, if, when, let's say, a community were to have an AI application come in, there was a consultation period months before it started on how to configure, on how to construct, on how to build the technology, then you could have really positive outcomes. Then you could have genuine empowerment. And so, that's where governments do have a certain ability to say, hey, this technology is going to help us all. And there's some truth to that, but not without effective regulation, not without effective oversight. For example, here's a no-brainer here in Canada, but something many people don't link to AI: broadband access. Right? Like universal internet, affordable internet, to make sure that everyone in every community is able to access the technology and resources available. The fact that there are still so many people in Canada who are basically second-class citizens because their internet sucks, that very much limits their ability to learn about AI, to use AI, and to participate in the dawn of this AI society. So while theoretically, 100% we could be using this technology for good, but I don't see that happening right now. And it would really take a lot of transformative work for that to take place.
All right. I want to thank our guests for joining us on Unpublished TV. Jesse Hirsch, researcher and public speaker. Research interests focus largely on the intersection of technology and politics, in particular, artificial intelligence and democracy. And Dr. Emma Bryant, visiting research associate of human rights at Bard College in New York City. Coming up on the next Unpublished TV, we'll take a look at the federal government's new gun legislation, Bill C-21. Hope you can join us then. Thank you for watching Unpublished TV. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.